Hello and welcome to Paydirt TV. I'm Dominic Piper. Today I'm joined by Big River Gold Executive Chairman Andrew Richards. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dominic. Pleasure to be here.
Andrew, you put out your quarterly activities report a couple of days ago.
Yes.
In it, you mentioned the option study that you're doing on your Barbarima gold project. You have been talking about possible expansion on that project for a long time, but it seems like the option study is bringing the idea of expansion right to the fore.
Look, we'd always anticipated this was a project that deserved a bigger plant than we had designed there, and there were a variety of reasons why we did a 2 million tonne per annum plant and that staged approach. We're increasingly of the view that will be expanded sooner rather than later. But I guess the trigger, the impetus for us to redo the option study rather than just go with the DFS that we finished last year was twofold. One, the delay in financing because of coronavirus and other aspects. And secondly, with the introduction of some large institutional investors on our register, there was obviously an appetite there to go to bigger, and the question was raised quite validly was, if you go ahead with the plant you've designed right now, will it impede in any way an expansion? And that was a very valid comment. So we had a look at some of that, and we saw ways in which we could improve it. I've got to stress, the mining, the processing, all that sort of stuff doesn't change, but there's just a choice of equipment, whether in some cases we have larger plant or smaller plant or rearrange it. And I've got to say I'm quite excited with some of the results that have come out of that review. Now what we're doing at the moment is we have got some selected equipment, we're tightening up on that, we're updating the costs, and I think given the time frame between when we first did the DFS and now, some of the costs are getting a little bit stale, if you like, so we're going to freshen those up as well. So when we do resume the hunt for financing later this year, middle of the year I think, roughly this time, we will have up-to-date costs, much better process design and equipment design, so that when we do go to an expansion, and whatever site that expansion will be, it'll be at an incremental cost of a much lower magnitude and no production impact at all.
So have you identified exactly how far you might expand? Have you got numbers in mind, both for tonnages and ounces at the back end?
Yeah, look, there's a number of options we can look at. So we just selected 4 million tonnes per annum, and that's because we're currently permitted to that at the moment. Now, whether it goes to 6 million or 3 million, that has to be determined. And a large factor of that will be securing sufficient water to meet the process. And we're making inroads into that quite significantly, which is why we're also accelerating that as well. We will still start with a 2 million tonne per annum plant, and then we'll finish off the feasibility. Let's say we double the size of that, then obviously it would become a producer significantly higher, maybe between 100 and 150,000 ounces a year, which is, I guess, the sweet spot for junior miners and junior producers, in fact.
You've obviously got a lot of confidence in the project then, given that you're anticipating almost doubling the size of the plant. Is the DFS robust enough now to be able to take, once these studies are finished, be able to take to finances?
Yes, it was robust enough before. It threw off a lot of cash, relatively low capital cost. I think when we revise the total capex, I don't think it'll be materially different from what it was before, but there'll be some areas where it obviously will change. But we've also got to put in the latest things like inflation over the last year. The currency exchange has moved very well in our favour. There's certain tax exemptions we received. So when that fire comes out in the wash, I think it will remain a very robust deposit, throwing off a lot of cash.
If you're going to expand, you would probably need to find more tonnes and more ounces to fill that plant with.
Nope. We've got that. The project we have, the deposit, is big enough to take a much bigger throughput. I mean, the 2 million tonnes per annum was only limited by the amount of water we could supply to it, which we secured. More water, go for it. But the reserve itself is over 40 million tonnes, and the upside potential is much larger as well.
I noticed in the report you mentioned that you're kickstarting exploration again. You've brought on Bo Nichols, extremely experienced Australian geo, both in Brazil and in West Africa. You've brought him on board as technical director. What are your plans for exploration this year?
Well, we would like to do some more regional exploration, but obviously with coronavirus restrictions in Brazil, we're going to confine ourselves more in the first instance to drilling around the current pit designs on the site, which is much more manageable. And there are, look, this deposit goes down much deeper than we have drilled it to at the moment. We'll put some holes at depth to do proof of concept, but they're some years away. So we'll prove that you've still got a 35 to 50 metre ore zone at depth. But there's also a lot of inferred resources that can be converted to indicated and then to reserves quite readily. There's some high-grade shoots that appear to extend outside of the current pit designs, which we will test and have never been drilled before. So we'll have some news flow. We'll expand the deposit, but even as the resource reserve stands at the moment, there's sufficient tonnes there to support a 3, 4, 5, 6 million tonne per annum plant for quite some years to come.
You mentioned the impact of COVID-19, and obviously the pandemic has had a debilitating effect on operations in Brazil and indeed the entire country. How much of an effect has it had on Big River and your development studies?
Look, on the ground, relatively little. All our people are, in fact, still working from home, although I think on the 17th this month we go back into the offices because they're desperate to get out from home, as many of us are. They'll be working back on the site. The regional exploration has had effect in quite a few areas, and certainly Brazil has been hit very, very hard. We're not actively mining or operating or constructing on the ground. We have got access to the site. We have had visitors coming from the site because we're only 2 hours from the international airport. But until we start boots on the ground construction, which probably won't be until next year, we can do most of our stuff through engineering and studies. In fact, some of the detailed engineering, which we had planned to do in Brazil, we're actually going to do here in Perth now. The biggest impact the coronavirus has had really on us has been the reticence of financiers to come to Brazil. That is changing, and we're certainly seeing some change from the North American institutions with the change in our shareholder register. That's been very positive for us since the start of the year.
You mentioned the change in capital structure.
Yep.
You've refined it really over the course of the last 3 to 4 months. We had a big capital raising just before the turn of the year. Does that make you a much more interesting proposition for those North American investors now?
Look, I think it does, North American and European, because I think the unspoken elephant in the room at the time was how can a small company with a large shareholder overhang on one particular shareholder develop a very large deposit in Brazil when you can't get to it. I think bringing in some of these very experienced gold-focused institutions onto the register at the end of the year gave us 2 things. It gave us the capital to actually do some of this detailed engineering and keep things moving along. But it also did change the perception of us in the wider market, because all of a sudden we are now having a shareholder register which is aligned to what we're trying to do here. And you're right, we did consolidate our share registry. And that had a big impact as well, because when you go to the North American or European market and they say you've got 1, 2 or X billion shares, which is common in Australia, it's not common overseas, and they sort of look at you with, well, what's kind of going on? That's kind of settled things down in that regard. So we've seen I think our perception of us is a lot, been improved significantly over the last few months.
So the capital structure's tightened up. You've got nearly $20 million in the bank. What's the plans for the next 6 months?
We're looking at tightening up the costs on our option study. We'll present the financial model, which I anticipate will be pretty attractive. Around about the middle of the year, that should be made available to some financiers who've been discussing things with us. And I would hope that by the 3rd quarter we'll have financing squared away. That includes due diligence and legals and documentation. In the meantime, we still have sufficient cash to keep moving things along with the detailed engineering and eventually moving into the EPCM.
So do you expect to make a final investment decision this year, or when can we expect to see it?
Oh, well, effectively, we've decided to go ahead with this. It's a question now of just finalising the fine details. So effectively, we are pretty committed to getting this in construction. Whether it'll be 2 million tonnes in the first instance. It's a question of if and when we go to this big expansion, and that'll be sooner than later, I would suspect.
Andrew, it's a big project, it's a big opportunity, and maybe only a small company at the moment, but it seems like you're set to become a rather larger company.
We have ambitions.
Best of luck, and hopefully you can catch up with us again in a few months' time and we hear how that option study has progressed.